Everyone loves the comfort of knowing they're safe inside their own space. Whether it's a hotel room, an apartment, or even your own home, there's a sense of privacy we take for granted. But what if that privacy was only an illusion? What if someone, somewhere, was watching without you ever realizing it? Tonight, we'll be looking at 3 disturbing, true hidden camera horror stories. Each one is a chilling reminder that no matter how normal a place may look, you never really know who might be on the other side of the glass or the wall or even the ceiling. Let's get into it. I was 19 when this happened. At the time, I was in community college and working part-time at a grocery store. I didn't have much money, and I definitely couldn't afford luxuries like hotels. But one Friday night, I decided to get away for the weekend. My best friend had just moved out of state, and I was feeling restless and lonely. I'd booked a cheap roadside motel about an hour outside my town. It was nothing fancy, just one of those places with a big neon sign and rooms lined up in a row. When I checked in, the guy at the front desk barely looked at me. He just slid the key across the counter and told me I was in room 7. The place smelled faintly like mildew, but for $48 a night, I wasn't expecting much. The room itself was exactly what you'd picture. Beige walls, scratchy carpet, a bed with a floral comforter, and a little table with 2 mismatched chairs. The bathroom had one of those buzzing fluorescent lights that flickered when you turned it on. Still, I was fine with it. It wasn't supposed to be a vacation, just a place to clear my head. The first night was uneventful. I got fast food, watched some TV, and fell asleep pretty quickly. It was the second night when things got strange. I was sitting on the bed scrolling through my phone when my eyes landed on the alarm clock on the nightstand. It was one of those black digital ones with glowing red numbers. At first, nothing about it stood out, but after staring at it for a moment, I noticed something odd. The lens on the front, the part where the numbers showed, looked a little off. The plastic wasn't smooth. There was a tiny black dot above the numbers. I leaned closer, frowning. It didn't look like dust or a scratch. It was perfectly round. That's when my stomach dropped. I'd read stories online about people finding hidden cameras in hotel rooms. Sometimes they were disguised as smoke detectors or outlets. Other times they were tucked into alarm clocks. And the way this little hole was positioned, it was pointed directly at the bed. I picked up the clock. It was heavier than it should have been. When I tilted it, I heard a faint rattle inside, like something shifting. My hands started shaking. I turned it around looking for a brand name or label, but there was nothing. Just a blank black casing. I set it back down quickly and stepped away. My first instinct was to leave immediately, but my car was parked right in front of the room. If someone was actually watching, they'd know I found the camera. They'd see me leave. That's when I remembered something that made the situation worse. Earlier, when I checked in, the guy at the desk hadn't asked for my ID or even a signature. He didn't log anything, which meant if someone was doing something illegal, there wouldn't be much of a record of me being there at all. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding. I pulled out my phone and Googled how to find hidden cameras in a hotel room. One article suggested turning off all the lights and using the flashlight on your phone to spot reflections from lenses. So that's what I did. I shut off the lamps and scanned the room with my flashlight. Within seconds, my stomach twisted. Above the TV, tucked into the corner near the ceiling, was a small smoke detector. At least it looked like one. But when the beam from my flashlight hit it, I caught a glint of glass inside. A lens. That made 2. I started trembling. I backed toward the bathroom and shined my light at the mirror above the sink. Sure enough, in the corner of the mirror's frame, there was another tiny hole. 3 cameras, all pointed at the bed in the bathroom. That was when I decided I couldn't stay another second. I shoved my stuff into my backpack, grabbed my car keys, and opened the door. The moment I stepped outside, I froze. The desk clerk was standing across the parking lot near the office, smoking a cigarette. His head snapped toward me the second I opened the door. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just stared, the glow from the cigarette lighting his face. I quickly locked the door behind me even though I wasn't going back inside, just out of instinct. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys once before fumbling them into the car door. When I finally got in and started the engine, I glanced up. The man was still watching. I peeled out of that lot faster than I've ever driven in my life. I didn't even check out. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station about 15 miles away. Inside, I told the cashier everything about the cameras, the clerk, all of it. She let me use their phone to call the police since I didn't want to risk my cell dying. An officer actually showed up at the gas station to talk to me. He seemed concerned but also skeptical. He said he'd send someone to check the motel. I gave him the room number and described the devices as best as I could. The next day I got a call back. They told me that when they checked room 7, there was no alarm clock, no smoke detector, no cameras at all, just an empty room. They also said the clerk I described claimed he had never seen me before. That was the part that made me sick to my stomach. The police asked me if I was sure I even stayed there. Of course I said yes. But they told me the motel's records showed no guests booked for that room that weekend. And since I had paid in cash, there was no proof. To this day, I don't know what really happened in that room. I know what I saw. I know I held that clock in my hands. I know I saw those lenses shining back at me. But officially, there's no evidence. Sometimes I wonder if the cameras were removed as soon as I left, or if the whole place was some kind of setup and I stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. Either way, I'll never forget the way that man stood across the lot, silently watching me pack my car like he was waiting to see what I'd do next. This happened last year. My boyfriend, Alex, and I had been together for about 6 months, and we decided to take a weekend trip to the mountains. Nothing fancy, just a quiet Airbnb cabin where we could relax, hike a little, and get away from work. The place we booked looked nice enough in the photos. It was described as a rustic A-frame with modern touches, and the listing had over 20 reviews, almost all 5 stars. The pictures showed wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, and a little loft upstairs with a bed. It was the kind of place you'd expect couples to stay when they want peace and quiet. When we arrived, the cabin looked mostly like the photos. A little dustier, maybe, but not bad. It was small, tucked into a grove of trees with no other cabins in sight. The owner wasn't there when we checked in. He left us instructions and a lockbox code for the key. The first night was fine. We cooked pasta, watched a movie, and sat by the fireplace until we got sleepy. I remember thinking how nice it was to hear nothing but crickets outside instead of city traffic. But the second day, while Alex was showering, I was upstairs in the loft unpacking a few things when I noticed something weird. Above the bed, on the slanted ceiling, there was a vent. At first, I thought nothing of it. But the longer I looked, the stranger it seemed. The cabin didn't have central air. There was a little space heater in the corner and an old box fan. So why would there be a vent at all? I stood on the bed to get closer. The vent cover was dusty, but in the middle of it, just barely visible, was a small circle of glass. A lens. I remember my chest tightening instantly. My first thought was that I was imagining things, but the more I looked, the clearer it became. There was a camera behind that vent, pointed directly at the bed. I scrambled off the bed and called Alex. He came upstairs, still dripping from the shower, and at first he didn't see what I was talking about. Then I handed him my phone and told him to shine the flashlight into the vent. The reflection gave it away immediately. Neither of us said much at first, we just stared at it. Then Alex swore under his breath and grabbed a chair. He unscrewed the vent cover while I stood there with my heart racing. Behind it was exactly what I dreaded, a small camera wired into the wall. That was when panic set in. If there was one, there could be more. We tore through that cabin. Checked every smoke detector, every picture frame, every lamp. And sure enough, we found 2 more, one disguised as a smoke detector in the living room, and another hidden in a lamp in the corner of the loft. All pointed toward spaces where people would undress or sleep. I wanted to leave right away, but Alex thought we should get evidence first. He carefully unplugged the cameras and set them aside. But here's the thing, all of them were wired, not wireless, which meant they weren't just recording to a card, they were connected to something. Alex followed the wires from the living room camera. They ran up the wall into a crawl space that looked like it led to the attic. We both just stood there staring at the ceiling. Neither of us wanted to check, but we also couldn't ignore it. Finally, Alex pulled the step stool from the kitchen and pushed open the attic hatch. A wave of stale air came down, carrying the smell of dust and something sour. He climbed up with his phone flashlight. I stood below, asking what he saw. At first he didn't answer. Then he muttered, "Oh my God." I climbed up just enough to peek. In the attic, tucked between insulation and beams, was a small desk. On it sat a monitor, a tangle of wires, and a DVR box recording the feeds from the cameras. And in the far corner, behind a stack of boxes, was a sleeping bag. Someone had been living up there. The boxes weren't storage. They were food wrappers, water bottles, and piles of clothes. The sleeping bag looked recently used. I felt my knees go weak when I realized what that meant. Someone hadn't just been watching from afar. They had been living right above us. Alex whispered for me to get down quietly. We climbed back into the cabin, both of us shaking. At that point, I didn't care about evidence or refunds, I just wanted out. We grabbed our bags and rushed to the car. But as we pulled out of the driveway, Alex froze. Down the dirt road, maybe 50 yards away, stood a man. He was tall, with a hood pulled up over his head. He wasn't moving toward us, just standing in the middle of the road, watching the car. Alex floored it, swerving around him. In the rearview mirror, I saw him turn his head to follow us until he disappeared into the trees. We drove straight to the nearest police station where we handed over the cameras and explained everything. The officers seemed alarmed but not surprised. One of them even said something like, "You'd be shocked how often we get calls like this." They promised to investigate, but we never heard back about the outcome. The Airbnb host claimed he had no idea the cameras were there, that maybe a previous guest had installed them. But that didn't explain the attic setup or the man we saw on the road. Airbnb refunded us, but that didn't erase the memory of lying in that bed, knowing someone was recording. Or the thought of that sleeping bag in the attic, just a few feet above our heads. To this day, I can't book an Airbnb without checking every vent and smoke detector. Even then, I still don't feel safe. Because if there's one thing I learned that weekend, it's this. When you're being watched, you don't always know it until it's too late. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was driving cross-country for work. I had a long route and couldn't afford expensive hotels, so I stuck to cheap motels off the interstate. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect, nothing special, just a bed, a bathroom, and maybe a TV with a dozen channels. One night, somewhere in the Midwest, I stopped at a small roadside motel. The kind with flickering neon lights and a parking lot with more potholes than cars. It was late, I was exhausted, and I didn't care about appearances. I just needed a place to sleep. The man at the front desk barely looked up when I checked in. He slid me a key without much conversation. His vibe was off too quiet, almost avoiding eye contact, but I brushed it off as small-town weirdness. My room was at the far end, near the back. It smelled faintly of mildew, and the carpet was stained, but again I wasn't picky. I dropped my bag, locked the door, and pulled the curtains shut. I was halfway through brushing my teeth when I noticed something odd. The bathroom mirror. It was larger than usual, covering almost the whole wall above the sink. But when I leaned in close, I realized the reflection seemed off. It felt faintly darker than the rest of the room, like the mirror was tinted, almost smoky. I didn't think much of it until I remembered something I'd read online years ago. The fingernail test. If you press your fingernail against a normal mirror, there's a tiny gap between your nail and the reflection. But if it's a two-way mirror, your nail touches directly with no gap. Out of curiosity, I tried it. No gap. At first, I laughed nervously at myself. I figured it was just paranoia, or maybe this old motel used cheap glass. Still, something inside me wouldn't let it go. I tapped the mirror. The sound wasn't right. Instead of the sharp clink of glass against the wall, it echoed hollow, like there was space behind it. My stomach dropped. I backed out of the bathroom, staring at the mirror. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to leave. But before I grabbed my stuff, I decided to test one more thing. I turned off the bathroom light. With the room behind me lit, I pressed my face close to the mirror and cupped my hands around my eyes. Through the glass, faint but unmistakable, I saw a room on the other side. It wasn't another motel bathroom. It was a small, dark space with a chair, a tripod, and a camera pointed directly at the mirror. I stumbled back, heart pounding. Someone had set up a hidden viewing room behind my bathroom. I grabbed my bag and was about to bolt when I heard it. A creak from behind the mirror. That was enough. I sprinted out of the room, leaving the key on the bed, and ran straight to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled the keys twice before getting the engine started. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced back at the row of rooms. The curtains in mine had been shut when I left, but now they were open. Someone was standing in the window. I couldn't make out his face in the dark, but he was watching me drive away. I didn't stop until I was 3 towns over, where I found a better-lit chain hotel. I called the local police from there and explained what I had seen. The officer sounded skeptical, but promised to send someone to check it out. A week later, I got a call back. They had investigated the motel and confirmed there was, in fact, a hidden space behind several of the bathroom mirrors. Cameras, recording equipment, everything. The motel owner was arrested, though no one could tell me how long it had been going on, or how many guests had been recorded. The part that haunts me most isn't even the mirror. It's that creak I heard, proof that someone had been back there watching in real time while I stood inches away. I still travel for work, but I've never stayed in a roadside motel again. And every time I check into a hotel now, the very first thing I do is test the mirrors. Because once you've been on the other side of that glass, you never trust your reflection the same way again. Privacy is something we rarely think twice about until it's gone. Each of these stories proves that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't in haunted houses or dark forests. They're the people who go to disturbing lengths to invade your most private moments. So the next time you're in a hotel, a rental, or even a friend's place, take a second to look around. Test the mirrors. Check the vents. Notice the little things most people ignore. Because as these stories show, you never really know who might be watching. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the most ordinary places can hide the darkest secrets. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care, and goodbye.